What up, YouTube? Here with a post-fight video of the Artur Beterbiev versus Callum Smith fight. This was for the unified light heavyweight titles, and I'll tell y'all the results first before I give y'all the summary of what happened in the fight. Artur Beterbiev was able to successfully retain his unified light heavyweight titles via 7th-round TKO corner stoppage win. When Callum Smith, his corner, stepped up to the ring on the behalf of Callum Smith when he was dropped for the second time, that's when the fight was officially over, and Artur Beterbiev is continuing his current undefeated streak with having all his wins coming via knockout in his professional boxing career. And to do that versus Callum Smith, who is a veteran and who's fought on bigger stages than this fight versus Artur Beterbiev, Callum Smith fought arguably the biggest name and definitely the cash cow of the sport of boxing, being Saul Alvarez, and Callum Smith was on a good win streak before his defeat versus Artur Beterbiev. And for Artur Beterbiev to drop, matter of fact, better yet, to stop Callum Smith, who's never been dropped in his professional career prior to this fight, is more proof of how serious Artur Beterbiev is as being the current majority unified light heavyweight champion, and as well as him being considered to be the best efficient power puncher currently active in the sport of boxing right now. And this fight was a one-sided, brilliant, dominant performance on Artur Beterbiev's part, because I had this fight score a shutout prior to the fight being called off. And Artur Beterbiev did a good job at cutting off the ring versus Callum Smith. He had Callum Smith trapped against the ropes and against the corner throughout majority of the fight. He did a good job at getting past the jab of Callum Smith. Callum Smith, being the more rangy, taller fighter, having the reach advantage, couldn't utilize the jab to his advantage to stop Artur Beterbiev, the shorter fighter, at his tracks. Artur Beterbiev was able to get through the shots of Callum Smith, and Artur Beterbiev was doing a good job at closing the gap and being accurate with his shots, and his punch placement is improving fight by fight. And Artur Beterbiev, his combinations was landing efficiently and accurately, and with the power that Artur Beterbiev carries, it was doing its damage on Callum Smith, and the wearing of the effects from Artur Beterbiev's shots was showing on Callum Smith as the fight was reaching towards its latter ends. And Artur Beterbiev, despite the fact that him being the favorite in this fight when it comes to the betting odds, this, I would say, is the most impressive win on his resume right now, other than the fight versus Joe Smith, when he knocked out Joe Smith early in their fight to become the new unified light heavyweight champion. He won the WBO belt from knocking out Joe Smith in their fight. And he defeated Anthony Yarde as well. And that was a scary fight for Artur Beterbiev because of the cut that he has suffered in that fight versus Yarde, regardless of the fact that Beterbiev successfully defeated Yarde and retained his light heavyweight title by knocking out Anthony Yarde, as he did all his opponents. And I would say the next fight that would be appropriate for Artur Beterbiev to have is for the undisputed light heavyweight titles versus the current WBA light heavyweight champion Dmitry Bivol, who by many is considered to be the best light heavyweight, even though Artur Beterbiev holds the majority of the titles at light heavyweight. Currently, if you look at the major sanctioning bodies, Artur Beterbiev holds 3 out of the 4 major world titles in the light heavyweight division, while Dmitry Bivol only holds the WBA light heavyweight title, and the IBO isn't considered to be a major world title in the sport of boxing. And Dmitry Bivol had won that title in his last fight, and it wasn't versus such a high quality opponent. And if Dmitry Bivol wants to have another fight versus another fighter for his next fight of a higher caliber, to have a better competitor to prep, not looking over if Dmitry Bivol and his camp decides to fight another fighter instead of Artur Beterbiev, who I think both Beterbiev and Bivol should agree to fight each other next, because that's the only fight left at light heavyweight, and it's the most intriguing, compelling bout to make happen in the light heavyweight division. And with this current momentum that the sport of boxing has got going on right now, we're putting on undisputed title fights with one division having one champion at that weight class. It will only be right for this fight with Bivol and Beterbiev to happen next for both fighters. It would be the best move for both fighters to make happen. Now, you look at the current rankings of all the title organizations' rankings. You look at the WBC, who had Callum Smith ranked as their number 1 contender. After that is Dan Aziz. He is a British fighter who is undefeated. He is a young and up-and-coming prospect. And with the resume that Dan Aziz has right now, he's a little bit green as of right now. He hasn't fought any championship-level opponents. For him to be having a fight versus Artur Beterbiev, I think that would be a rush step for a fighter like Dan Aziz to take at the current stages that Aziz is on right now. I think he needs to add a little more experience factor to his game for him to have a fight of this magnitude for 3 out of the 4 major titles at the light heavyweight division. Even though Aziz would be the number 1 ranked contender according to the WBC rankings. And then the WBO has Joshua Buatsi, as well does the IBF has Joshua Buatsi, who is another British fighter who is undefeated and is a young and up-and-coming prospect as well. He has more notoriety locally and globally than Dan Aziz, both being a UK-based fighter. Joshua Buatsi has more notoriety because he's fought on bigger stages and has had more media backings than Dan Aziz. But I would say that fight would be a rush step for Joshua Buatsi and his camp if they was to go to challenge Artur Beterbiev for any of the respective IBF, WBO light heavyweight titles, regardless of the fact that Buatsi is the number 1 ranked contender according to both title organizations, because of the fact that Buatsi is still green and early in his career as of right now. As I said, for Dan Aziz, Joshua Buatsi would like to collect more wins and gain more experience and fighting tougher opponents for him to be considered ready to fight for the light heavyweight titles. Now, you look at the next best ranked contenders according to the titles that Artur Beterbiev currently holds right now. Now, the IBF had a light heavyweight contender by the name of Mang Fanlong, who was formerly undefeated prior to losing to Jean Pascal in his last fight via unanimous decision. He was ranked the number one contender according to the IBF light heavyweight rankings. Now, one loss in a career that was, I would say, green, that Mang Fanlong had prior to losing to Jean Pascal, still would have him ranked amongst the high-ranked fighters in the light heavyweight division. And one defeat in a professional boxing career doesn't hurt or affect a fighter as much as the media nowadays would like to consider a defeat to be when it comes to fighters taking losses. And there is no outlets to blame of why it's like that nowadays when it comes to how boxing spectators criticize fighters and their defeats, because you look at all the greats in boxing history, majority of the greatest fighters of all time, they tend to have defeats, more than one defeats in their professional boxing career that has been cemented as legendary. And Mang Fanlong wasn't a fighter of high notoriety, and for him to take a loss versus a experienced veteran but at a prime fighter like a Jean Pascal isn't, I would say, the best of look for Mang Fanlong if he wanted to potentially challenge for a world title. But it's a learning experience nonetheless. And I would say Mang Fanlong shouldn't be considered the number one ranked contender. I don't know if the IBF website has changed its rankings, but after a defeat versus Jean Pascal, who I don't think is even in the top 10 rankings of any title organizations in the light heavyweight division, would have to put him down on the totem pole of the light heavyweight rankings. And that's why Joshua Buatsi, if updated, who was number 2 according to the IBF light heavyweight rankings, should have Buatsi up at number 1, while they should rank Mang Fanlong down to wherever they find fit for Mang Fanlong amongst the top 10 rankings in the light heavyweight division. And if, as I said, Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol doesn't happen immediately next for both fighters for their next fight, Artur Beterbiev can take on Jean Pascal, who is a Montreal-based fighter. That would be a big local fight in Montreal, Canada, if Beterbiev and Pascal was to fight for the light heavyweight titles. And with the experience level that Jean Pascal has and the drawing ability that Jean Pascal has, with him having prior big level championship fights in the past in that specific city where both fighters are based at, that fight with Pascal and Beterbiev would be a good look for that city and its local boxing scene. And it would be a fight where not only boxing fans can tap into because of the clout that both names have, with Jean Pascal being a former light heavyweight champion and Artur Beterbiev having a record where it not only impresses boxing fans but the public, because having 100% knockout ratio would have any person look at it on paper without ever witnessing that fighter's performance before with a eye-opening wow reaction because of that resume and that number that is of Artur Beterbiev. And Beterbiev has a fan-friendly style, and if that fight versus Pascal doesn't happen, regardless of the fact that Pascal defeated the number one top-ranked contender, Mang Feng Long, when it comes to the IBF rankings in the light heavyweight division, then there is Gilberto Ramirez as well, who is experienced, who is a veteran, who's fought at super middleweight at a high level, and as well as him challenging a current light heavyweight champion, Dmitry Bivol, even though he lost versus Bivol in a one-sided fight. That fight would be a tough test for Beterbiev as well. And if he's to get a victory, which he would be the favorite in that fight versus Zerto Ramirez, would be another well-known name added to his resume that is on a uppity slope right now. Either fights would be a good look for Beterbiev versus veterans like a Ramirez or Pascal. I would say Ramirez would be the more competitive fight for Beterbiev to take on because Ramirez isn't as worn out as Pascal and is more fresher than Pascal, and I would say is the tougher opponent and the better fighter than Pascal. That's why it would be, not marketably speaking, because locally, if that fight were to happen in Montreal, with both Pascal and Beterbiev being from Montreal, that fight would be a bigger fight for the Montreal fans. But purely speaking, when it comes to the sport aspect, then the fight versus Ramirez would be the better fight for Beterbiev if he wants to continue this uppity slope. Of course, it's not a better fight than a fight versus Dmitry Bivol for the undisputed light heavyweight title. But if that fight weren't to happen, I think the best option for Beterbiev is to have a fight versus either Gilberto Ramirez or Jean Pascal. As I said, Buatsi and Aziz are, I wouldn't say Buatsi and Aziz is better fighters than Zerto Ramirez because they haven't fought a fighter that is on the level of Gilberto Ramirez. And if a fighter, let's say either Buatsi or Aziz, was to fight Jean Pascal, who is a veteran but isn't in the prime of his career and is more of a stepping stool for young fighters like a Joshua Buatsi and Dan Aziz, that would still be a good tough test for a fighter like Aziz and Buatsi, even though I think with the skills that Buatsi and Aziz carries would cruise to a easy victory over on a fighter like Jean Pascal. And I would say if they were to fight a Gilberto Ramirez, it would be more of a 50-50 fight on paper, but I would still favor Buatsi and Aziz to get a win over on Gilberto Ramirez as well, and especially if they were to get more impressive victories added on to their current undefeated careers right now. But as I said, they're not ready to challenge for the titles, and with the potential that both Aziz and Buatsi has, I'm sure the promoters would like to have Buatsi and Aziz collect more easy wins and not go for a rush move of having them go for a world title this early in their professional careers. And it would be safer for Buatsi and Aziz's camp to gain more experience by fighting fighters like a Jean Pascal or a Callum Smith and Anthony Yarde and names like that for Buatsi and Aziz to get their ranks up. And as I said, the next fight to make happen in the future, if not immediately, would be the ideal fight for the undisputed light heavyweight titles with Artur Beterbiev and Dmitry Bivol. And with that being said, that does it for this post-fight video. Y'all let me know what y'all opinions are from this fight that y'all saw. And with that being said, subscribe to this channel. Like this content if y'all want. Share it if y'all want. Click the links in the description to show y'all support for this channel. Anything will be appreciated. And that does it for this video. I'm out of here, y'all. Be good and peace.